Shinichiro Watanabe is a cowboy who looks as if he's jacked into the Matrix 24/7, and hey, who am I to say, he might well be. The dude brought his own flavour to the sci-fi landscape, with shows that defined a generation of late-night viewing on both sides of the Atlantic. He's a real rebel, but with a cause: to make original TV anime. He wasn't interested in adapting other people's manga. He had stories to tell and a team to assemble, especially since he couldn't draw himself. He was a self-taught filmmaker, and that was a lot harder to do in the mid-80s before there were services like Skillshare that could teach you professional tutorials at the convenience of your own home. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of creative skills. You can explore classes from everything from filmmaking, creative writing, to marketing, and more. If you're a premium member, it gives you unlimited access to all the high-quality classes from experts working in those fields. And that will just generally get you to be the best creator you can be. Skillshare is also pretty affordable, at an annual subscription being less than $10 a month. Now, recently, I've been using the Tutorial Premium Pro 2018 for beginners. And if you're looking to get into filmmaking, I think this is a good place to start. No, I've been using sort of Premiere for about 10 years now. It's kind of my go-to one. And I like to go through these courses from time to time to see if there's anything I've forgotten. I could learn some new shortcuts and tricks and tips to sort of make the process a little easier. And sometimes I find a little trick like this where I should have been doing it for the last 10 years and I've only just realized I can now. So yeah, don't be like me. Go to the description, and if you're one of the first 500 people that do, click on the link. You will get 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. So go do it, and we'll get back to the video. Watanabe's drive to create the original is the reason he joined Sunrise. So it's the late 80s and we're in the heat of mecha madness. Top Dog Gundam is firing out so many shows I've forgotten half their names. I think he worked on that one. Lucky then, one of his first projects was Votoms, or should I say a Votom spin-off. Oh, you've never heard of Votoms? I mean, I don't blame you. It's a real robot show with a focus on hard sci-fi. You know, less Jedi pilots dueling out in space and more mechanical freights in dire straits. Whatever that means. Look, it's just so real. Oh wow, real. Man, I don't think robots could get any realer than this. So Armor Hunter Mellowlink is that if it was also Mad Max 2. Watanabe was an episode director here and there on the OVA, and while not leaving a huge impact on the show, working with the creator Ryosuke Takahashi shaped how Shinichiro approached his future projects as a team player, whose members are as important as himself. Watanabe was no auteur as we know it, even if he was treated as such. But that doesn't mean his shows aren't eclectic. It's the ability to assemble the brightest and the best, while giving them enough freedom to shine, yet, still hitting those deadlines, that makes Watanabe such a desirable director to work with. But now we're getting ahead of ourselves. The real story begins with the chance meeting between Watanabe and the creator of Macross, the rival to Gundam. Watanabe shared a desk at Sunrise with Shoji Kawamori while he was developing a movie, which never came to be. Like this next project. So, Macross 2 was a huge flop that no one likes and no one talks about, or so I've heard, I never watched it. So, Shoji wanted to bring some fresh blood to the franchise. QR Boy, who took the co-director spot for Macross Plus. It was taking the show away from its bombastic space opera kind of side to a smaller personal tale that's closer to Top Gun than Logan's Run. Well, at least at first. We have love triangles, idols, mecha planes, the stuff you expect from Macross, even starting with a space battle with an epic missile barrage. Which brings us to the OVA animation. It's the pinnacle of its era. Those 4 episodes are lavished in detail. There's the reflections on the glass, the jet engine's heat warping the air, the shimmering sunsets, countered by the blazing dogfights, which happen to be encompassed in this airy classical, bringing it this dissonant beauty. Pretty good. Well, who else would it be but Yoko Kanno? Her first collab with Watanabe, and I'm glad it wasn't her last. The music pushes Plus beyond the pretty animation and a cut above any of those other cyberpunk shows of its time. Just seen from its opening shot, hitting you with that main theme. A stark, beautiful a cappella with a mythical property, a recurring motif that drives the heart of the character drama, It's sad but soothing while it plays that hauntingly beautiful melody. It's nostalgic, it reminds me of youth and innocence, it's all about that love, losing one's love as they fly away, only to reappear out the blue. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Kano wasn't requested by Watanabe, but Victor Entertainment, who heavily recommended her. Despite working on a few anime beforehand, Kano's experience is in advertising, but that served her well. She's able to convey those clients' intents with a limited amount of time, and that was enough to impress Watanabe and company and get the position. Her choice in techno came from the idea that music tends to trend in cycles, so I thought the music of Macross Plus would be 2 cycles ahead of the current trend. And the intensity in which she conveys the music brings a lot of spectacle and weight to those character interactions. The idol sequences are hypnotic and sultry, going from experimental 90s raves full of quick cuts. As we jump between vibes and songs, Sharon's cold exterior can change aesthetic at the flip of a switch to suit the new crowd, and the crowd loves it. Macross was ahead of the curve on this one. Little did they know about the world's coming fascination with pixel-perfect performers. When mellowing the performance, Sharon becomes an ethereal ghost swaying through the audience, putting a spell on them. A clashing intimacy forms that makes me wonder about what the future of virtual concepts might be. The further you go into the story, the more uncomfortable elements are dragged to the forefront. Desire, control, how far artificial music can influence people. That mixed with its animation and editing makes it beyond a shadow of doubt one of the best things about Macross Plus. In contrast, we have this track like Welcome to Sparefish, not far off the bebop track. It's a downplayed sliding guitar devoid of any electronics, echoing that old cowboy chords. And that is totally Dyson's character, the main character. He's a rebel who can't follow the rules, a man from a different time who lives in the moment, even if he has this hot-headed, bullish demeanor. He means well. The rest of the tracks vary from your fist-pumping techno to somber piano. In my mind, Plus's OST should be remembered with those of the other many iconic Kano soundtracks. Even if Watanabe wasn't 100% with it, not having a complete control of that score. He was outnumbered by other people on the committee, and there were many fights about the direction and where the show's going, especially around the music. In the beginning, Watanabe uses music to define the direction of his anime. It rules his creative process, although it does not become the process. The narrative is still the key, but it is there to set a tone and build upon what's already there, like the backgrounds or the character designs. Macross Plus's crisp backgrounds were inspired by the animation crew's trip to LA and an actual army base. The research pays off, as I've never seen animated planes that are as intense with their believability. Flying across these rich skies, the characters that pilot these planes are designed with that hard 90s aesthetic. They were designed by this guy, best known for his work on... This is like a change from the prior Macross style, which was super 80s. Plus's is intense. It's got the sharpest noses, the biggest pecs, got overt chins, warped proportions, funky clothes, and wacky hairstyles. It's all super to the extreme. This was the OVA era, after all, original video animation. These were high-budget animations that came out on VHS, released with a couple eps at a time. They had no schedule, they had more time than a weekly anime to develop, and also covered more taboo subjects. Mature themes and all that. High contrast, deep shadows, 3 shades of colour, you name it, we got it. And a lot of those traits were in the original Macross as well. However, Plus was a bit more forward-pushing, being one of the first animes to incorporate CGI into the show. The use is minimal, and it does still hold up. Oh, geez, CGI was a bad idea. Whoa, what was that? The Eden architecture feels retro-futurist with the occasional American element. The streets are definitely LA, the skyline is New York. It sets up a world that's not a million miles away from the 90s, including how everyone is still using landlines and payphones in the distant future. Lawrence Green talks in his essay about how the anime was a precursor to the more in-depth sci-fi from this era. And there's hints to this, but I believe it's kind of riding the path of a different anime that was incredibly successful and influential. Akira. What we both agree on is that this is a story about AI versus humanity, funneled through the battle between 2 planes, for which we'll get funding. One controlled solely by the pilot's skill, the impulsive, driven, open with his feelings type, and then the other having a state-of-art, mind-controlled mecha, needing the pilot to be in a sort of calm, meditated state. A man that suppressed his fighting instinct because of what happened in his past. So he took that AI path. Plus feels these pilots are necessary to rise to the challenge, having a resolve and stubbornness to do what they deem to be right. Perhaps seeing the world of AI military intervention as unfeeling, prone to manipulation, and without responsibility. However, in episode 3 it is contrasted with the issues of a human pilot. See the aftermath of both pilots' bad blood, leading to a massive jeopardy in its testing phase. Then the military had to cover up the whole situation anyway. The conflict of these two pilots and their prior history drives the show forward. It's one of the most compelling things in the series. What happened between these two in the past? Who's in the wrong? Will this heated rivalry end in blood? Which one's going to get that girl? Or should I say Sharon Apple, as their childhood friend Myung is also the mind behind the famous AI idol. The first shot we get of the idol echoes that of HAL 9000, with its cold, unfeeling red eye. In the public eye, Myung is the producer. However, behind closed doors, she is a slave to Sharon. The whole process brings attention to the darker side of the music industry. Loneliness follows, destroying the passion she has to make music in the first place. And of course, some of these themes, you're going to see them later in different anime like Perfect Blue, which is more so about the idol industry, but it's the same kind of concept. That's before the plot of Plus just implodes and becomes a story about how Hatsumiku wants to go mental and burn down the whole world. So yeah, we're going to get into some full spoils now, and well, I guess this whole retrospective will be super spoiler heavy, so prepare yourself. Making an AI as unpredictable as a human, the closer these computers get to human, the more dangerous they become. The human is spontaneous. It's not easy to control like a machine. Seen in episode 1 where the AI system shows Gold, he can kill Dyson instantly, and that bemuses him. But then there's a level of shock in his face when the plane actually does it, showing that he didn't have 100% control. You see the visualization of the boost distorted by this purple haze, giving you this impression that it's probably not his sole fault. How about episode 2 with Sharon, where we finally start to see the malfunctioning beginning? And there are parallels between these two parts where, falling in love, Sharon's logic becomes to warp. It's definitely something that you see a bit more in the movie version, where it dabbles in the concept of, is love real to a machine? Does it deserve the right? Is it valid? Yeah, Macross Plus is not going to be doing much more with that concept. You're going to have to wait like another decade or so before any of those kind of questions get shown in another movie or show in the mainstream. In the end, the humans win out against the AI only through letting go of their restraint and opening up. Gold saves the day from the AI stealth bomber at the cost of his own. It's a somber moment, but it comes quickly after what happened in the prior episode. The main conflict between the both of them was a repressed memory, a misunderstanding. I wish this plot had been given more time, expanded upon, considering how important it is throughout the story. The reveal is strong, and it does recontextualize Gold's decisions as a man desperate to do anything he can to keep his narrative alive, no matter what the costs, despite it being lightning fast and will give you total resolve whiplash. It's understandable some elements don't get as much screen time. Shoji wanted to take these 3 major concepts in 4 episodes. And if we just had 1 more episode, I'm sure it would be more well spread, but there's just no way of doing that now, is there? Since the ending turns into like a typical save the world piece, abandoning the core of the character drama from the earlier episodes. Though you could argue the setup at least attempts to make the conflict about the drama, just in a super elevated way. The major conflict is emotional. Conflicted feelings come together, turning an AI into an antagonist. Not sure if it needed to be as big, world-threatening, but still they do a good job at converting 3 radical different concepts into one narrative. So that's a good job there. Keiko Nobumoto. The show is rewarding in rewatches, as you pick up on a little bit more of those subtle areas of character performance and get to see the whole picture from the start. In my mind, the OVA is better than the movie. The movie adds a couple pieces here and there, but what's lost doesn't justify it. I already feel the OVAs are too short, so cutting the length in half, like the movie does, no good. Oh yeah, the dub is cool too, because there's Bryan Cranston. He plays the main character. Oh, and the rest of the cast would appear in the next Watanabe project. A project that went further into the sci-fi future. But first, let's talk about Blade Runner. Watanabe isn't the first director to see Blade Runner and think, yeah, I'm into that, I could do something like that. But with Watanabe, he saw the rich world of textured people, the fashion, architecture, and he let us spend more time in it. With those people, we get to know the melting pot of cultures on display, instead of only getting a snapshot from afar. Moreover, he takes that cryptic piece of philosophy sprinkled throughout and sort of builds upon it. You have to really think to get into the thick of it. You can watch them passively and be like, hey, that's cool, stylish, that music, fun. But then later on you might think, what is it to exist, to carry that weight? So how did we get to Cowboy Bebop? So after finishing the movie version of Plus, Watanabe danced around Sunrise. He's working on, he's a unit director here, he's a storyboardist here. But then Minami, who's now one of the heads of Bones, asked him if he had any ideas for a show. This is where Watanabe would be the sole director and he could do anything he wants, as long as Bandai Namco could sell a couple toys. But Watanabe decided to give them way more than they could have imagined, as they shrieked, "This will never sell spaceships!" So after he produced 4 episodes, they dropped the whole project and threw it into complete development hell. I can see why. The first episode of Bebop is full of drugs, murder, and what might as well be a joint suicide. That's not exactly advertiser-friendly content. I'm probably not even going to be able to show on screen. Lucky for Watanabe, Bandai Visual dragged out the project from limbo, saving it, well, for now. So on the 3rd of April, at 6 p.m. on TV Tokyo, the first episode of Bebop aired. Starting from that OP, Bebop punches you with its slick style, beginning with that deep narration, preparing you for that breakdown into catchy jazz. You got the noir imagery, cut with the style of a living Blue Note cover. It's iconic and bombastic, and it prepares the audience members for that mishmash of styles the director is so accustomed to. Mixing so much stuff, it becomes almost a new genre, and that genre will be called Cowboy Bebop. Oh yeah, hear that bass? Oh, that bass is savage. Then we got to get into Lupin III and the similarities. So we have 4 characters from radical different backgrounds that come together to get into wild misadventures full of chasing, espionage, and interplay, barely escaping danger in time. But it's worth noting that when I talk about inspiration or similarities, Watanabe has stated that early Lupin is what he's interested in, the Masaki Osumi version, which is the first 4 episodes of the first season from the 70s, which I'm sure he watched when he was a kid. It was considered darker and closer to the source material at the time, and it shocked a lot of people, not dissimilar to Bebop. Yet, Shinichiro made a distinction early on. He wanted there to be a clear ending. Unlike Lupin, which is still going to this day, God rest Monkey Punch's soul, he wanted to have a strict ending, and his crew did not like that idea. But if you see the show, you know how this goes. So who is on this crew? Because it is an all-star team. Several members returned from the past, and there's a couple more that Watanabe met along the way. Yoko Kanno, the returning composer from Macross Plus, the chameleon self-stated herself, who made a name for herself with that eclectic mix of jazz, rock, and gospel. Next, we got Nobumoto, and as Watanabe has stated, out of all the scriptwriters he's worked with, she's probably the one that he has the best synergy with, the best group dynamic. And she's sort of the series composition person. Together, they decided that Bebop would be an episodic show, which was a change of pace from the prior productions at Sunrise, and definitely a more American style. Next, Toshihiro Kawamoto, the animation director and character designer, who designed the timeless looks for the Bebop characters, as well as animating some of the most cool fight scenes. Sure, there's a bunch of other animators and designers, like over there you got Shoji Kawamori. He did some of the designs for the show, and Watanabe and him are still pals, despite all the arguing in their prior project. It's such a unique moment that in a disaster project where it barely finishes in time despite several delays, that the team come together to create something that is lightning. That it could jump from its somber tones of the first episode to the silly slapstick of the second. It was a tightrope of genre and style, among its caviar of references to other pop culture. So like over there, you got the rotating room from 2001. The whole show is just like that. It's just hundreds of different pieces of media, all mixed together. Many were documented on the Ghost Lightning blog, as he went through every episode one by one and sort of made a nice little list. And I'd recommend it for those interested. The same could be said about the music, which is just a melting pot of genres, which power many of the scenes, even influencing their creation, since the process was, let's say, unorthodox. Kanno was given full control to create as many songs as possible without direction. Many of them went completely unused. While some of the music was made in the moment, hence why each episode is referred to as a session, that improv element was so important to the original bebop genre of music, it stuck with the show as well. Yoko Kanno herself is very fond of working with Watanabe because she considers that he respects musicians a huge deal and sometimes even values the music over the story. You could see that maybe in like the church scene where that was recorded live with the musicians at the same time as the big band, because they wanted that Baroque feeling. They wanted that energy, even if the recording wasn't as great or it came off a little bit raw. And that sort of element makes the scene so much more explosive. And of course, there are episodes where the music is just strictly the focus of the narrative point, like the second half of an episode here or there. If the soundtrack wasn't as great, you couldn't get away with that, but Kano delivers. So much so, when 33 1/3 decided to make a series about Japanese musicians, this was definitely one of their first picks. That's on all Japanese musicians, but they decided to pick this one is really telling of the quality. Each character has their own sound. Spike's a big band, kind of jazz guy. Jet's all about the blues. Well, Faye lacks an overall score, but it's an intentional move, more so because of her lack of identity. But when her past becomes clearer, so does the small musical accompaniment which revolves around it. And who could forget Ed's kooky version of Shibuya-kei? I mean, you could almost forget about it because of the banning situation. Maybe 6 p.m. was not the best time for Bebop to be shown. A lot of people were decrying it, and eventually the show was cancelled. If that was for ratings or outrage, who knows? But there was a special that came out afterwards. It was kind of like a summary of the philosophy and thoughts of the crew. Just in case they could never make another episode. It was quite rambly, and it was a different take on the clip show format. So you think at this point, Watanabe would be screwed. But no, somehow the show was picked up by another station, Wow, and they went on to play 26 episodes. And of course, this was on a much later time slot. Then it was a hit. Boom, there you go. Was it enough of a hit to deal with the over-scheduled, over-budget nature of the show? Well, not at first, I'm sure. But maybe after spending 20 years in syndication all over the world, winning many awards and a boatload of different home releases, we can hope it's doing just fine. One of the reasons it succeeded out of Japan was that accessibility. It's palatable to people that aren't accustomed to anime. Many would call it a gateway. There's that age-old saying, I don't like anime, but I like Cowboy Bebop. A level of old-school cool with a rebellious nature that shines through. And after hearing about the production, that's just no wonder. It was mature, and maybe the first mature animated show a lot of teenagers saw. Had a pretty steady tone, about 80% serious, 20% comedy. Bebop never plays its full hand. It's part of its allure. You need to rewatch it and piece the puzzles together. It's a bit aloof from its viewers. This would suit the nature of late-time anime watching. Every week you catch the reruns that you can just stitch together in order. I'm sure the dub was pretty helpful in this regard because it wasn't awful, and is still respected to this day. I'm going to say it ain't perfect. The main cast do a great job, but side people, that can be a bit rough around the edges. But having a good dub expanded the show's reach from a targeted anime fans who were kind of used to the subpar quality of the time. I'm sure there's still many fans out there who only want to listen to the dub. If it's nostalgia or if that's just what they're accustomed to. But for those people that haven't tried the sub, it's worth a go. Especially for Megumi, I'm going to butcher this, Megumi Hayashibara's performance as Faye. There's a different energy to it than in the dub, and I think it's pretty refreshing.
3で割るより2で割る方が気持ちよく分けられるわ。これだ。呆れるわね。ハッカーが怖いだなんて。
So it's not just enough to have a good dub. You need somewhere for people to see it. And I present you Adult Swim, the newly opened schedule block, which made Bebop its first anime. Adult Swim's success is Bebop's success. And it's still shown to this day on the station, I'm sure. So beyond the many factors that made it rise outside towards the American audience, what gave it that special factor that got out of the country to begin with? I'm going to say the characters. You've got these four mains that are distinct in their own story, and they sort of go against what you expect from their sort of character type. With Spike, you have someone who was inspired by Yusaku Matsuda. That's definitely the look. Like they share it enough. You put a picture next to each other, you know what you're looking at there. But of course, there's some Lupin in there. There's some City Hunter. He's a laid-back cowboy who flows like water, rarely loses control, but most of it's just a facade. He's haunted by his past and feels like he's living in a dream. He's more honourable than the scummy bounty hunter you would let on to be, and he definitely goes through a lot of growth during the series. Next we have Jet, who's a big contrast to Spike's sort of sleek, kind of otter style. He's big old muscles, he's old, he's bold, and he's the father of the crew. Tough, gruff, acts like he doesn't care, but obviously he does. Big old softy. Faye, the honky-tonk woman, the femme fatale in theory, but not in practice. I mean, loud, yellow hot pants with a hairband, that's quite the look. Definitely an Alice in Wonderland sort of thing going on there. Youthful items next to the womanly sort of vixen style. up a facade of sass, talking her way out of those situations, or into them, you never know with her. She does have a lot more similarities to Spike than anyone else, in that they're both ruled by a past that they sort of can't get away from, but she's the complete opposite of Jet. Now, Watanabe once stated that before Bebop, he met a composer, a certain composer who was female and eclectic, and in the production she would kind of roll on the floor and do strange things, and on occasion she would make strange noises, and he once thought, what if I turn that into a character? May I present you Ed, the best character. It's the divide between the eccentric child and the genius hacker. Ed is the heart of the crew, and she brings the family together. But without Ed, they're kind of splintered. And you see that in the early episodes, but as soon as Ed appears, it sort of brings a levity to the crew. And next to Ein is a great little counterweight. All the other crew members are fixed on the past, where Ed has no past, so it doesn't really matter to her. She's like a cat wandering through life, to settle down a bit and then move on. When she leaves, it signals there's no more mushroom wranglers or goofy cowboys on the horizon. Also, fun fact, Ed wasn't actually originally going to be a girl. They were planning to do like a little boy, but it seemed like a better idea in the end to sort of balance the numbers between girls and boys. And I mean, it's even debatable in that, because Watanabe's later stated that, is Ed even a girl? Like, Ed is so ethereal, so gender neutral. He almost considers her, or them, like an alien, like beyond us, because genius hackers need no genders, I guess. They live on the web. Ultimately, one of the strengths of the show is how a lot can be said without saying a word. With that visual and audio and the characters themselves being so bold, it becomes a little universal. And that seems to be how it can translate to so many different countries so effectively. But it expressed to her every aspect of life, including resignation, grief, and intimacy. That's something Kano said about a jazz funeral, but I think it also stays close to what the show is really about. What makes it mature is not the violence or the drugs or the cast of older people dealing with all their past they couldn't fix, but the journey itself is a fleeting one. To say anything about those moments in Bebop, even the sad ones, is that they were fun. Seeing the gang every week, it becomes routine. You get to know everyone like family, and you don't know how good it is until it's gone. Each episode's unfolding of someone else's dreams, laid bare, and the crew sees this, even though they spend much of their time running from theirs. Jet said it best when he pointed out that being an adult is knowing things move on, and that those times have to come to an end. Which is why 20 years later, Bebop's 26 episodes stand out. They could have continued, they could have gone on forever, but when the story was closed, there was nothing more to say. Besides, did he really die? So Bebop conveys these sort of two messages before the final confrontation. Jet gives this sort of Hemingway short, which is about the mountain in Africa, Kilimanjaro, and it shares some similarities to Jet's own personal life. It's an American tale. He's got to see parallels with himself. A man that's hung up on this woman who he feels is holding him back, and he finds out that it was really him all along that was holding him back, and he was just looking for an excuse. Jet also has a little shot on the leg, though I don't think he's going to die of infection anytime soon. But as a whole, Jet kind of moved past his own past. He's dismissive of this idea, and he says himself, people only care about that stuff before they're going to die. And you could definitely bring out that this is Bebop's post-modern sensibilities, taking on a modern fiction and sort of poking fun at it, being a bit dismissive. And the show has sort of brought out this opinion before, that people dying for their revelations just isn't its style. There's that part, Spike shoots his fingers, pew pew, because he thinks the idea of dying holding on to something from the past is silly. Of course, Bebop is all about defying those conventions. Now, on the other side, you have the Japanese story, which is it's like a kid's book, and it's this one right on the screen right now. I'm going to throw over him. And Spike tells this story, which is definitely relating to himself, about the wandering tiger-striped cat that dies many deaths but always comes back until they find true love. In losing that love, they themselves die. And the story is kind of about, a very disgruntled cat who sort of jumped through life not caring about anything. And when they finally found something to care about, it really hurt. I'm sure that's a metaphor about, emotional baggage or whatever. If this is really a story, as it's pointed out, that the untying cat is Spike, and he's only going to die after Julia to sort of make things right, or because he feels like life ain't worth living anymore. In his own way, he's sort of mocking this idea, because he hates cats anyway. Some could say that Spike is fated to die, like Laughing Bull has mentioned a couple times, as he talks about, pitiful lost souls that fall, and how his guardian spirit is going to pass. Yet by the end, Spike's no longer lost. He's no shooting star. And the star that fades at the end, if that is Vicious, or Spike's guardian star, I'm sure it's left up to the audience to decide. And doesn't even matter if he survives. Having a clear-cut answer is obviously not what the show's going for. The important part of the story is that Spike knows that he's now not dreaming. As he says himself, I'm not going to die, I'm going to see if I'm really alive. The blood's over one of his eyes, and that eye that's covered is the artificial one, the eye that sees the past. He's currently living the present. He's woken up. He's no longer beholden to the past and can move on. Vicious is gone. His past is gone. It's a new day. What's more surprising than the director slaying the competition to make a classic on the first shot is that this was also a genuine hit, even after all the mishaps. If this show wasn't a hit, you know the way Watanabe basically worked on it meant that he would have never been in the industry for another day in his life. Even himself, he said, if Cowboy Bebop failed, I'd guarantee I'd be one of those guys working in a ramen shop who's overly fussy about minor details and little things in his ingredients. So that brings me up onto the final point when it comes to Bebop. Watanabe's statement that the best thing an author can do for the public is not produce what is expected. So what's going on next? Wait, there's a movie? But I thought the story's already done. What are they going to do with that?
Just a humble bounty hunter, man.
We received requests even before the show ended in Japan, both from viewers and the producers. Bebop was a success everywhere. Even now, they're pushing out that live-action Netflix show. Oh god. But the original is still a notable figure, a classic anime, and its success had many effects on the industry. Watanabe went from respectable zero to absolute hero, with his first feature deal with those famous filmmakers wanting a piece of the action. It's an animation that created a whole studio, Bones, whose founded members all came from Sunrise Studio 2. They're the people that made Bebop, including Bebop's producer, Masahiki Minami. He left Sunrise among others like the Bebop character designer, but they kept the ethos of making original sci-fi anime, with the attention to detail you'd expect from that team, which is the exact reason Watanabe came back 15 years later, but we'll get to that later on, don't worry about that. First, Bones was assisting on his movie, Knocking on Heaven's Door. It's a bit of a victory lap. However, there's an issue with the setup like this. It can't be a continuation because the ending is so set. Don't want to give any answers, go against the point. It can't be a prequel because you can't have Bebop's dynamic without having all the crew. So the film slots in somewhere in the middle, or between episode 22 and 23 to be more exact. It's a 6-episode span with the biggest bounty yet. Since Watanabe's output is so filmic, himself saying it's how he approached the show. So that sounds like a match made in heaven, right? Well, it's more complicated than that. To condense a whole film's premise into an episode or two was part of the Bebop experience. It was loose, expressive, but always had a momentum pushing it forward at a frantic pace. The structure of the film changes the way Bebop is packaging itself. Like he says himself, it's mostly a question of story structure. There's a different dynamic to a movie, where your basic target is someone that knows nothing about the story, and is getting the whole build-up from start to finish in one viewing. And this lends to a sequence like the opening, which condenses the essence of the show into 5 minutes, and does it beautifully, now with that movie quality animation. This is also true of the set pieces in the film, inventive, multi-layered, with strong choreography. Think about that broom fight, that was crazy. They vary it up and have chances to be much longer than the show given the excess runtime, although this can lead to some pacing issues. Like Helen McCarthy said herself, the movie's only real fault is that it's about half an hour too long. There's no less than 4 musical montages. And as wonderful as the action scenes are, I don't know if we could have lost too much by just a little trimming, just a smidge. Especially when considering several members of the cast were pushed to the sideline. Edward wanders off, Jet sits on the ship 90% of the time, Faye's tied up for like half the movie. Also gets a little bit creepy, but we're not going to get into that. How sometimes the minor characters feel like they get more focus than the main quartet. Other members of the crew have sort of mentioned that because it takes part in that current continuity, they can't do anything dramatically different. I had to keep everything like the show, said Kawamoto. And this could be an issue with the way the story is composed. The character arcs, they just can't move. They have to be in that static position. No one can be affected strongly, no one can die, you can't change the status quo. Yet none of that could have mattered if it was just like a light-hearted joint, where you have some silly interactions and that's the focus. The producers wanted the movie that would feature Ayn, the dog, on vacation somewhere. They didn't want it to be too serious. So yeah, if this was like a crazy Ayn film, I mean, I would have watched it. Probably wouldn't have been as like poignant as the show, but it would have had a nice little flavour of its own. So the other option they probably would have had is a compelling story with new characters that just feature the Bebop crew, not dissimilar to the own show's like walk-in approach. Knocking on Heaven's Door aims for the latter, and aims is the key word. We have Vincent, the antagonist, like a fair weather kind of villain. He's straight out of like a Metal Gear plot without absurdity and 7 bait and switches. This is sort of a no fun allowed story. He goes, oh look, he's looking at bleed, he's so cool, man. Ooh. He's a militaristic terrorist threatening his city might as well be New York with chemical weapons. Some reviewers did bring parallels to 9/11, but the production started far before that, and even Watanabe stated that this flick was brewing in his mind even when he was making that TV show. If anything, it's closer to the Tokyo subway sarin attacks of 95. Does it have anything to say about them? I very much doubt it. It seems to me that censorship is definitely more of a concern when making television shows, and that this was a sort of a plot that he could really only do in a movie. Because there's nothing in here that talks about cults or a reaction to extremism. To me, the plot has more similarities with prior Sunrise projects like Armor Hunter Mellowlink. You got yourself a disgruntled vet who sees all his comrades die, he's left as a footnote in some experiment, and he comes back real mad to get revenge, or to find out if he's really alive. What I like most about Vincent is his use in set pieces, including his musical motif. It's a bit like a Steve Reich piece. It builds like butterflies floating in his mind. Vincent is a bit of like a dark mirror to Spike. They both fought in wars, live in dreams, excellent fighters, questionable pasts. Vincent subconsciously buried his memories while Spike just floated downstream away from them. Both linked to another lady from a time they want to forget. In terms of Vincent, that's Elektra, and as the name will entail, she's a tough lady who wears red and will cap you if you don't play your cards right. That's not to say she doesn't have a delicate side, it's just that Elektra isn't much of a fleshed out character. She's important to Vincent for sure, but she feels a kind of way about him. Considering she used to be part of the same team, she wanted to save him. But that's about as deep as we're getting here. I'm not sure if the parallels are supposed to give Spike and Vincent interactions more weight, but the issue is there's no personal stakes between these two. This guy isn't vicious or a prior comrade to Spike. He just happens to be in the same purgatory. If anything, this is Elektra's story, but she doesn't really get much shine. It's a bunch of good vignettes tied together with a so-so plot, like turning a middling B-side into a main attraction. Sure, you can re-record it with your big band and mix it with all the minute details and get the crispest sound, but if the core of the composition is underwhelming, why even bother? Sure, there's a ton of great shots, and it's pushing beyond what you could do on TV. It's got spectacular animation next to a fantastic score. You have a lot of crazy sort of alt-rocky tunes from the 90s. I mean, those sort of vocal tracks were popular in the first Bebop, so it makes sense. But for me, the highlight comes from that jazz fusion big band aerial chase towards the end. The way the music coincides with both the comedic, bouncy, and the explosiveness of the fireworks, it just crafts a bold mixture. And it's one of the best dogfights you're going to see since Macross Plus, with its final crescendo erupting with the last plane just... It's nice. I'm sure this is all fine for most people who just want to see more of the crew do cool stuff. The film made like $3 million at the box office, so that's a given. It's not a bad time, but I wonder if we could get a picture that's a little bigger. Thank you to Behinox and Arturo Coral. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. Yeah, so thanks to the Patreons for being very patient with me. I haven't been around because I've been working straight on this. Next video should be out in about 2 weeks' time, give or take.